Hello and welcome back to Startups, People and Equity. This is a space where we discuss topics, related to startups, people and equity. We hope that you will enjoy listening to today's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Let's dive straight in.
So Natalie Pierce is the co-founder of the FutureKind Collective with her co-founder Alicia Grimes. They help clients make culture one of the strongest assets. She studied economics at university and also has a background in design. So how you landed in culture will probably be one of the first stops on the conversational journey today. She has been taking improv comedy classes for almost a year now and has 2 live performances under her belt. So I think that means that we can expect to have fun as well as learn today, but I don't want to set the expectations too high. You live in London and with your partner, and you have 2 rescue dogs sleeping behind you. So you spend a lot of time walking and exploring green spaces around you, which is amazing. We connected through our kind of aligned mission in the people space, and that because we both serve clients through consulting services, and I had great fun every time we chatted. So thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much. What a lovely intro. I really enjoyed that. I was just hearing about myself. I do feel the pressure now to make this fun. So I'll improvise.
Yeah. How does an improv comedy class go? Like, what do you do when you arrive?
Oh gosh. It is improv. In the beginning, it's a lot about playing games. So the early courses, it's about getting comfortable with the unknown, trusting your scene partner. It's about like leaning into vulnerability together, and you do that through games. So one thing I've learned about actually everything I've learned about improv is incredibly relevant to my work life. But one thing in particular, I know so many good like icebreaker and warm up games that I can bring into work. So that's amazing for my repertoire. And then later on, it's more about creating something out of nothing. So 2 people go on stage and they're like, you're in a park and the sky is blue, or like you're in a park and you are cousins, and like you just make something from there. And it's about being silly and vulnerable, and it's so applicable to my work. Like it's actually crazy. So I definitely think it's made me better at my job, and I think anyone and everyone should and can do improv.
Fascinating. And from a very similar question, how did you journey into culture and consulting?
Not through improv. That came later. So yeah, actually not. It wasn't an obvious journey. It wasn't like I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I actually, as Thomas mentioned, I studied economics at university, and I kind of didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was like, economics sounds like I'll make a lot of money, so that sounds good. I kind of muddled through uni. Everyone was getting internships and graduate schemes with like banking, finance companies. We were economists, so obviously that's what people do. So I did that, and I ended up having a graduate scheme with a UK bank, and in that I had like 3 different placements, and I was still like, oh my God, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I'm good at. Working is kind of weird. Like I didn't really find where I fit. But then I was lucky in that I met, the great thing about working for a big bank was that you would meet a lot of people along the way. I happened to meet someone in the digital strategy team. So I joined there after my graduate scheme. And then from there, that led me into design. So I joined the service design team for the bank's mobile app. And that's kind of where I learned everything I knew about design. But this was like post financial crash banking world, right? So it kind of speaks to how naive I was at this time, because I didn't think there was anything wrong with joining a bailed out bank after the financial crisis. But what I later realized was that the areas that were most stifled or most impacted were actually your creative areas. So I was a designer, service designer, that had no kind of budget or scope to be creative. So again, like, it was a scenario where I knew some people, opportunities arose. I was very lucky in those early stages of my career, and I met someone that was starting up a new design agency within a kind of bigger tech consultancy, and that place was Spark, and I worked there for a number of years, and that was where kind of culture came into the picture. So consulting, I kind of fell into that, and I kind of fell into culture as well. But what happened is, because I joined the company at such an early stage, so I was employee number 3 at Spark. As with any startup, like, you're employed for one role, but you actually end up doing like a million different things. So one day you're a consultant, then you're a marketer, and then if I was unlucky, I'd be doing something on finance, and then I'd be doing sales. I say that because I'm bad at maths, by the way. And anyway, I always gravitated towards the people and culture elements, and it was specifically because when I joined Spark, I felt such an immediate and strong sense of belonging that I wanted everyone in the company to feel that same way. So, for example, I was like, I'm going to design our onboarding experience, and I'm going to approach it in the same way that we would approach design projects with clients. And it kind of snowballed from there. And then, to cut what is already quite a long story short, when we got big enough that we needed to establish a leadership team, I was like, you need a head of culture. Oh, and by the way, I think that person is me. And it the role existed elsewhere, right? But I didn't know that this role existed. So I kind of created it, and I said, my role is to design our employee experience in the same way that we would design customer or user experiences. And that's essentially what I did for the 2 or 3 years that I was doing that role. And that then kind of led to me being like, I want to do this all the time, specifically the culture element. And later down the line, the FutureKind Collective was born out of that.
Gosh, I love that trajectory. I think our postgraduate lives has started off in a very similar way, which is very funny to hear, like, how 2 parallel lives kind of went in actually not that different directions. But so I have one question with regards to Spark. Did you and the company design processes and experiences? Was there a graphic, like a more traditional design? I guess I'm battling with the term design as well. It's used in so many different contexts, and I'm trying to wonder, like, which parts of it did Spark cover?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you'll notice that often when I say design, I will then caveat with service design, because that's my like particular specialism. But Spark itself was really end-to-end digital design. So we weren't designing brands, we weren't designing physical products. Now, with service design, sometimes there is like an overlap, but it was design within the technology context is really where Spark sat. So yes, there was a graphic and product design element from digital product perspective, but there was a lot of like design strategy and digital strategy that we did as well. And I think then linked to that, whilst we did the kind of specific product design, like we need to build this app, for example, a lot of our work was government work. And that meant that you were looking at really big end-to-end services that had lots of different touch points and lots of different people and systems involved. And that's where the service design element comes in. And so my specialism, if you like, was strategy and service design and that kind of experience part to it. And we obviously did like user research and discovery and things like that.
What I think would be a very useful thing to do before we dive into deep conversation is define or hear you define culture. When I was going through your website, I was seeing 10 different ways that I have never thought of how to think about culture. So I think for the listeners, if we define that, that's already a life hack for early stage companies, at least.
I would love to. So I define culture in its simplest way as a social contract between a group of people that have a shared goal. And that social contract determines or defines how they will act, how they will behave, how they will interact with each other or others within the ecosystem that they work with. It determines the how that will help them be successful in realizing their shared goal. So I'll just kind of say that again, because I kind of went around the houses a little bit there. So culture is a social contract between a group of people with a shared goal that determines how they're going to be successful. And I think when we think about it like that, it takes it out of the work context, because culture isn't just a work context. Culture is created in communities, it's created in countries, entire countries and nations create culture. It's really just about the norms and the behaviors and the things that you tolerate and celebrate, as well as the things that you don't tolerate and that you actively avoid, and that kind of undermines the type of culture that you want to be. And I think that when we look around us, we can see that at play all the time. Like all of us, if you think about our families, for example, there would have been lots of like norms and rules and behaviors that your family and you growing up found acceptable. So I always think this is quite a fun example of like, where do you store your eggs? Do you store them in the fridge? Do you put them in a little basket on the side? Do they stay in the carton? Or like, where do you put your ketchup? Like, I know there's rules about where you put your ketchup, but some people are like, no, I'd never put it in the fridge. Some people swear by putting it in the fridge. It's like these little things, that these micro actions that it's like, this is the way we do things around here. And we do these things because it's going to help us be successful. It's going to help us have a tidy home or good food or, a nice working environment. So I really like to think about it from that context and to define it in a way that doesn't just hold it to the workplace, because I think it is much broader than that.
I really wanted to, as soon as you said social contract and the way you explained it made complete sense. And then I was brought back into two experiences in my life, and I was trying to see if maybe with your help, we could see what makes a culture strong versus super malleable. So let me share my experience and you'll see exactly what I mean. Lived in Switzerland for a year and just recently lived in New York City. And I'm comparing the same thing. So waiting at a train or subway station and boarding onto the train. In Switzerland, everyone stands on the sides, waits for everyone to get off, and then you go on. I was a foreigner. I saw that everyone was following this same rule so intensely that I followed suit. I fell in line immediately. In New York, you could just call it a jungle. I mean, it's the concrete jungle, and it's literally a jungle. You go to the train station. Some people stand on the sides. If you're from Switzerland, you stand on the side. If you're from Slovenia, you kind of chameleon your thing, which is what we do. And you just go with the flow. So there's not really a strong culture that you fall into there, but in Switzerland you do. How do you take care of that in a company? Usually, or you probably want to see people follow the precedent.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So I love that example. I really, really love that example. And social, like what we see other people do is a massive actions, like tangible things, like that's what defines a culture, not just the words that we say. If anything, the actions are that's what really shows your culture. And often what we say is that you will know what a culture is really like in a company when, things go bad, because that's when the true colors come out and things like that. But before I talk about like what makes a strong company culture, I just want to touch on your examples, because it is totally understandable to assume that Switzerland has a strong culture because of that like very clear way of organizing around a train, and that New York doesn't. But actually I would say that they both have a strong culture. One of them is free form, one of them is every person for themselves. Like, I'm going to get to the front and I'm going to get, like, that sounds like New York, right? I don't want to, like, hopefully nobody comes to me for this, but like that probably is a bit more of a New York culture, I would assume. Whereas the other culture is more respectful of rules and more okay, let's be orderly. And neither of those cultures are wrong. Like, we have opinions on what we prefer, right? But neither of them are wrong, and they work within their context. There's pros and cons of each. And this is the thing, to your question about what makes a great culture, is that actually that the answer to that is very unique to every country and scenario and company. What is great for one person might be an absolute nightmare for another person. And that suggests that maybe that's not the right place for them, and that's okay. However, there are a number of pillars that I would say underpin any culture. And if you have these pillars, you are more likely to see great outcomes as a result of focusing on these things. And so there's loads of different ways of talking about these things. Like, I think every culture consultancy has their own version of this. We call ours our culture scorecard, and they're very similar, right? Some of us use different words, but it's about having alignment. So people being aligned around a clear purpose and mission for the company, and knowing the priorities of the company and how that influences their work. Linked to that, communication is one of the most important things, whether that's verbal, whether it's written, whether it's communication through our actions. Like, what are the little beacons of information that we're sending to people that tells them how we work around here, or keeps them up to date on, the purpose and vision, and how the company is evolving. And then you've got kind of how you want people to feel within that organization. So psychological safety. If people feel comfortable to speak up, to share ideas, to challenge, then that's going to benefit the whole community. Linked to that, people need to feel included. They need to feel a sense of belonging. So inclusion is a really big part of that. And then, of course, they need to feel well. I think that if we're not talking about well-being in the context of culture, any type of culture, then I think we're missing a point. You'll know, before we started talking, I said that I've just come back from 4 weeks off, away from my business. Me and my business partner went off at the same time. It's incredibly important to us, and you kind of have to go big with well-being now, rather than just these little faux benefits that we often see. And I think generally, like, there's a couple of other things, like, and you'll probably be like, wow, this is a whole shopping list, but there are a lot of things that underpin a good culture, and you can't necessarily succeed in all of them all of the time, but being aware of them is really important. So the last few things that I would mention is stuff like having and cultivating a growth mindset within your team, and recognizing and appreciating people, and having an actual like ritual around doing that. And then finally, and this is kind of underpinning everything, you've got empowerment that enables people to work and make decisions autonomously. So can people do their job with minimal interruption? Can they make decisions? Are there bottlenecks? Like, how do we get rid of those? Like, that kind of thing. So the empowerment allows us all to do all of the other things that I mentioned.
I just get more and more excited each time you add something because there's so many avenues we can take. But I chose one. I really wonder about like the prescriptive and the descriptive aspects of culture. And you mentioned psychological safety, and I kind of feel like that can only exist if it's more of a descriptive situation, because if you prescribe actions like these are what we do, then there isn't really room for the individual to mold that culture and contribute to it. And it sounds like it should be a living thing. But what are your views?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think you need both. I think you need to detail and be specific about what it is that's important for your culture. What are the values? What are the behaviors? What aspects of your culture are really important? So things like so it's like state the intent, and state the intent with a really good rationale as to why. Why is this important for this business? But if we just leave it there, then it's easily just lip service, and there's no way that you're like really holding yourself accountable. So I think that it has to be followed through with actions. Now, some of that action is just communication, like constantly communicating what's important to you as a business. Now, it's not necessarily just saying, remember, these are our values. By the way, these are our values. It's about bringing that into how you manage performance, bringing it into how you recognize people. So wouldn't it be great if once a week or once a month you had a values spotlight where you said, shout out to Tamas for living our integrity value or our fun value or whatever that might be, or like, here's a client story that really shines a light on this part of our business and this value. So I think there's a leadership aspect of like continually talking about those things and making sure that they're front of mind. And then I think it's about designing rituals and habits within your teams that does the same thing. So reinforces what's important to you as a business, but also creates the space for your teams to lead in those areas, and for your teams to feedback, and for your teams to be able to practice your values and showcase what's important to them as well on an ongoing basis. So I think it's kind of layers throughout the business of how we can bring that to life. But back to your kind of question of prescriptive versus descriptive, I think we need both, and it's both at the same time, not one and then another, and kind of it's kind of the two together.
We mentioned in the beginning also the employee experience aspect of culture, and I was wondering if you could walk us through maybe a specific example. I don't think I've ever been a part of a company where there was a specific employee experience element. I don't know if that's because I wasn't an employee in big enough companies, and only now, as a consultant in big companies, you don't actually get the employee experience. So I would be very keen to hear, what does it look like when you get a great employee experience?
Yeah.
It also sounds like, just one addition. It also sounds like you were ahead of the curve of calling it people experience, because I now see these titles pop up on LinkedIn. I feel like, that's a great way of describing like what the people team is kind of shaping. So just kudos there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it kind of like we kind of fell on it, and I think it's because of our design background, right? Like we think in experiences. That's just how we work, how we think. And so the whole idea of people experience, culture design, and that being a practice felt like quite a natural transition. But I guess maybe if we start with what an employee experience is, and then I can kind of hopefully bring it to life through that. So, an experience is just something that a person engages with in order to reach a certain outcome, right? And it's the fact that we use the word experience means that that should be interactive. I think it should be joyful. Some will say it should be convenient and easy and seamless. But, you know, sometimes difficult experiences are also worthwhile as well, or like friction-full experiences. Like, I'm not fully in the camp that everything needs to be seamless. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. So we've all become quite familiar with the idea of a customer experience, a user experience. So I have a product or a service, and a customer is going to come and use that. So it might be my phone, it might be going to the doctors, it might be going to the supermarket. And as a designer or an experience designer, you think about all of the moments that that customer will go through. So there'll be a discovery point. Like, I need something. What do I need? Who's going to provide this? So looking up for the brand or a company that can help you, doing a bit of research around that, maybe looking at some reviews. And then there's like a whole purchase journey. You might go to the shop and like actually look at something, try it on. Then you might go home and buy it online. Like there's all of these different moments. What happens after you've bought something? You might be asked for feedback. Is there a referral scheme? So all these steps that are involved in any customer experience that we know and love today. And an employee experience is no different to that. The experience is going to work, and the customer and the user is a staff member. And if you look at like the key moments within an organization, they're actually all the same. Like with customer experiences, there's loads of space for differentiation, but often in the design world, we'll break down any experience into 4 or 5 buckets. So you've got like an entice bucket, which is getting people to know your brand and know your product. You've got enter, which is onboarding a customer onto your system or onto your service. You've got engage, so like they're in now, they're a customer, like there's lots of things that they're doing within your kind of space. And then you've got extend or exit. So how do you make them loyal, make them come back, or like what's their exit journey look like so that they recommend and refer you? And an employee experience fits into all of those buckets. So essentially what we're doing is bringing that front of mind for our clients, and we're helping them get really intentional about how they can, number one, reflect their values in all of those stages, from recruitment all the way through to offboarding, and sending people, helping people get their leave the company well and go on to their new adventures, and also looking at each of those steps in the context of that culture scorecard that I mentioned. So how can we ensure alignment across this employee journey? What does communication look like at all of these stages? And so what we've done and what we're continually evolving is, under those buckets that I just mentioned, like what are the repeatable things that happen again and again and again within an organization that a company could get really intentional around, and use as an opportunity to build connection and belonging and all of that good stuff within their team, but also reinforce their values. I'll pause there because I imagine I haven't answered all of your questions, but hopefully that gives a good picture of employee experience.
I think so, absolutely. You kind of bridged into it already with that answer, but I would really love to understand the process, how you engage with clients, without giving away your secret sauce, but maybe like there is something for all of us to learn from that.
Yeah, so I mean, it'll probably be no surprise that early on in starting the business, we mapped out the client experience. We map everything out. We're like, and I would encourage anyone to do this, actually. I think that's a really good learning. Like, map it out from start to finish. And we've done this again and again and again in our business. So when we got to the point where we were like, we need our operations to work better for us, like we need to be smarter and more efficient, we did the same thing. We were like, okay, let's map out our internal operations experience from start to finish. And I think like that's a really good practice for any business, as I say. So for us, there, even before someone signed up as a client, there's a discovery phase. Like, let's learn about each other. Let's learn what your challenges are, what you're trying to achieve, what your ambitions. Let's learn about how we work as well, because I think that there is an assumption that consultancies and service-based businesses will just take anyone on as clients, and I think that's wrong. I think we should be open about the fact that between service providers, or between client and supplier, there needs to be a cultural fit as well. So there's kind of a bit of a due diligence, I guess, that comes with that. But assuming, we feel like we've got a really good match and we're going to work well together, we would then almost go through a similar process to what I just described with employee experience. So like there's an onboarding aspect, which is about how can we get someone up and running with our way of working in the quickest, most efficient way and the most exciting way. I think that one of the things that we really strongly believe in, and again, I think this is important for any kind of experience, is fun, joy, like moments of like delight is such an important thing to build in. So that's something that we try and do as early as possible for people. And then I guess our projects, like when we're actually in the project, they follow quite a kind of well-known and standard design process. So there's a kind of framework called the double diamond. It's illustrated by a double diamond, and the reason is because the shape can actually describes the process that you're going through. So like if you think of half of one diamond, it's like going out. You're kind of diverging and getting lots of information. So that's when we're trying to understand about the organization. We're doing surveys and interviews. There's my dog saying hello there. She's just turning around and getting comfortable again. Where was I? So yes, we start by going broad, trying to understand as much about the organization as possible. And then we will use that to then converge and narrow in on what we think the challenges or problems to solve are, or the main opportunities. That will then allow us to go broad again. So we start thinking about, okay, what solutions, what design ideas can we come up with to realize these opportunities or alleviate these problems to solve. And that's a very collaborative thing. So we believe that culture is actually owned by everyone in an organization, not just the people or HR team. And so we really get everyone involved in the business, and we pitch it as this is your opportunity to design the kind of company that you want to work for. So we want to hear your ideas, and we want to see what that looks like in practice, and we want to bring that to life with you. And so that's a really fun and exciting part of the process. And then the last part of the double diamond is where you're narrowing in and converging again. And that's about saying, okay, how do we make everything that we've come up with together tangible, actionable, and something that can be implemented? So that's about, developing out a roadmap, talking about owners, like the kind of the important strategy and project management stuff that has to come to make this a reality. And again, that's a collaborative exercise, and something that goes through all of our projects is bringing the entire company along the journey and getting those champions and those advocates, and also the non-advocates as well, because I think that a lot of companies, I see this all the time, they're like, this person should work on our culture because they love it, and like they are just, and it's like, yes, you should have those people, but you should also have your skeptics involved, because if you get your skeptics in, then and they're advocating for it, then you've won. I think so. Really thinking broadly about that, and of course we have an aftercare and offboarding experience, which is just as fun and exciting as the rest of it.
I was wondering, because you were describing this, going very broad and then finding the challenges. I was wondering if you would be able to pinpoint the most common challenges that come out of an unorganized, or I don't know how you would describe the culture that isn't as well set up. I can imagine that interdepartmental work would be very difficult, or all of a sudden you are in a silo, and all of a sudden you have a lot of departments working towards their own goals and not a company working towards their own goals. But I'm wondering what you see.
Yeah, I think you've described like some of the main ones, right? I think that one of the biggest issues is when you have misalignment. Everything kind of often comes back to, and at the end of the day, if you have people working on different, sometimes competing priorities, if you have people working in silos, if you have people unsure about what the right priorities are for the business, that's going to halt or hinder or even kind of stop altogether your ability to deliver. It's more likely to create delays. It's likely to create duplication. And at the end of the day, there's a morale issue that we come back to there, because when people feel like they're duplicating their work, or their work doesn't matter, or like they're kind of, it can be a breeding ground for the infighting that you get within teams as well, of like, I need them to do this, but they're not doing that. And that has a massive impact on morale. And I think often that can be a big reason why people then start to leave and look elsewhere. So I think that kind of misalignment piece is really important. And then I guess linked in a way, decision making, the ability for a company to make autonomous, quick, effective decisions is such a big strength and a big skill. But often, especially in like early stage companies, there is such bottlenecks, particularly like founder led companies there can be. And by the way, I'm holding my hands up and saying that we've recently hired people, and I'm very conscious that we are probably creating some of these bottlenecks ourselves. So this isn't a criticism. I actually think it's a natural misalignment, poor decision making, efficiency, all of these things that tend to be cultural issues, or you can solve them through a cultural change. They don't have to be like these big problems. A lot of it is just like growing pains and a natural part of growing. However, if we let them fester and if we don't address them, then that's when they can become much bigger problems as well. So those are some of the ones that are really front of mind for me. And I would like to add one more. Poor hiring decisions is an enormous one. And how do you know if you're making a poor hiring decision if you don't know what type of culture you're trying to hire people into? So this isn't about culture fit, it is about cultural add, and bringing different people into the team, but they need to know what environment you're bringing them into, and you need to know what values and what behaviors are so core to what you do that you can make a hiring decision on that, because the impact of a bad hire is not just the money lost from hiring and having to rehire. There's a massive kind of impact, like a ripple effect that happens in the rest of the team with like low morale or like productivity, and then having to build that back up can take a really long time. So that's a big one I just wanted to add in there.
It sounds like to me that creating culture is almost like taking this really messy and massive reality that we all live in, and like with a joint effort shrinking it down to a more controlled and more less messy, or however messy you want it to be, reality that then helps us distinguish like signal from noise.
Yeah, I really love that as a description. And I think that messy isn't bad, right? Messy can be great. It can be exciting. It can be energizing. I think culture design work is about creating guardrails within which that mess can and that chaos, which is just part of work, right? Sometimes, especially in the early stages, it's like creating those guardrails and those boundaries that enable you to manage that mess and that chaos in a productive and healthy and positive way. Because otherwise it's like a free-for-all, and it's just like the Wild West, and everyone's kind of doing what they think is right, but that's naturally going to butt heads and be much more tricky to navigate through. So yeah, I like that as a description. I also think what's important to remember with culture is the work's never done, never ever done. Like, you can't stop working on your culture because it's always evolving, it's always changing, and the world around us is always changing. So the outside world has a massive impact on culture. So, for example, a cost of living crisis is going to have an impact on your culture because people might not be feeling so great. Their well-being might be impacted, especially like financial well-being is a really important thing. It has a massive impact on our mental and physical health and how we show up at work, and psychological safety and things like that. So we have to be mindful of the fact that there's always going to be something that needs working on with regards to your culture. And that's okay. That's part of the beautiful journey that we're on with culture.
You mentioned founder-led companies before, and now I have 7 nested questions just out of that one word. And so I hope I can walk you through it. So it starts with, okay, what kind of founders actually come to you? What kind of founders are successful throughout the experience? Is it even up to the founders? Because at the end of the day, most of the founders do not found companies because they wanted to be people experience or people officers. They wanted to be CEOs and product people. So how do you bridge all of these realities? And which ones work best in your experience?
Yeah, so all of our projects, all of our most successful projects, the founder and CEO has been heavily involved. And I think that's crucial. I really do. I don't think you can do a truly successful culture project without that. And it actually goes further than them. It's the entire leadership team. Because whilst we do work very closely with chief people officers and heads of people, and we're often brought in by those people, we insist on being very close with the CEO and or founder. And also it's like a leadership journey that we're on. It's not just like a one team journey. So that's really key. And I think that the founders that are most successful with us, and I think generally in this type of work, are the ones that understand that culture is one of, if not their most important strategic driver to help them realize their vision. Because at the end of the day, no founder can deliver their great grand visions on their own. They are going to require other people, and the culture is the environment that those people work within. And so founders that do this work really early on, before they've hired people, that they're the ones that get to really lay out what type of company they want to create, and that will then help inform the type of people that they hire. However, I would say that founder intuition is really good as well, and like founders are intuitively quite likely to hire, like their first couple of hires are probably going to be quite aligned, and there's going to be a good kind of like cultural connection there as well. So in those early stages, when you're like, I don't know, let's say like 20 people, that's a really good time to do this work again, because then you get people to input into that, which is a really great experience to go on. And then you have like these advocates that are going to continue to live and breathe and kind of embed your culture alongside you as you grow as well. I think if for founders that are like, I don't see this as part of my role, or like that's not what I wanted to do. Like often founders get excited about brand, right? Like they're like, yeah, I'm going to create a brand and I'm going to get really excited about this. And it's like, well, like brand and culture are two sides, opposite sides of the same coin. So you can't put an all singing and dancing brand out in the world and be like, look at my incredible brand. Isn't it great? And then have like a shitty culture behind the scenes, because sooner or later people will realize that, and people will be like, hold on a second, like they talk about being really people focused online, but whenever I speak to one of their staff, they sound burnt out and miserable, like. So if you are a founder and you want to create an incredible brand and that's something that excites you, then you have to invest in your culture as well, because the two are inherently linked.
I have one more question here, and then we can perhaps talk about the joint realms of our two specialties, culture and equity. But I wonder if there is a bias in the type of founders that come to you for like more mature founders, or maybe second or third time founders, or if that hypothesis just doesn't hold.
It's an interesting question. I have not done any analysis on that particular on that dynamic, so I honestly couldn't say anything with any great certainty, but I am going to do this after that, so I'll email you. I'm interested now, but I haven't noticed that. I think all of the people, all of the companies that come to us are already very conscious of the impact that they want to have in the world. So they are very purpose-led. They're not necessarily just social enterprises. Like I think all of our companies are commercial companies, apart from like a handful of ones that aren't, but the majority are. But all of them are like set on improving the world in some kind of way, even if it's like a bit of a tenuous link. They can all kind of point to something. They all talk about making a difference, and I think that's the common thread. I think that's the one that's like, if you're intent on making a difference, then you are more likely to understand that impact and that difference that you're making also includes the impact that you have on your teams. So I that's been the link that's been front of mind for me. And I think maybe there is, I think that there is another link has often been around the whole kind of employee experience design. Other service-based businesses, or like SaaS businesses, for example, where people are like really at the forefront of like what they're putting out there. That has been something they're particularly interested in, like, okay, how do I like make this work from a people perspective? Not to say that B2C companies aren't. I think alignment in B2C companies is often clearer, especially in the early stages, because you've got the launch, right? You've got this very like tangible thing, whereas like the more ongoing types of work can make it a bit tricky, and that alignment is needed a bit more. Good question though. I'm looking forward to digging into that.
Here comes the bridge between the two specialties, and I've been working on a hypothesis of my own, and I think Tamas as well. We've been noticing that you can have a great brand or work on employee value proposition, employer value proposition, and it's this beautiful PDF, and you share it or you have it on a website. And then we come in as equity people, and we get to dig into the most core part of the founder and investor relationship, which is equity. Like this is the currency. It goes in, it goes out. You either want to give it to employees or you don't want to. And we very often see the true reflection of the company's culture in equity. How do they give it out? How much? Under what terms? And it's fascinating to see just through a couple of terms their real feelings for their employees. What is your maybe experience? Have you noticed anything when people are very generous with equity, or if they're trying to be very employee friendly? Does that usually translate? Also on the other side, you see that maybe they're really purposeful about culture.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and I really enjoyed speaking to both of you about this prior to this call. And I have to admit, like I don't have a ton of experience, especially in comparison to both of yourselves, with seeing and defining these terms. My perspective about equity and what that means in terms of culture, I often hear from founders something along the lines of, like, people say it in different ways, but you constantly hear people say, like, they're just not as invested as I am. I can't get anyone to care as much as I do. Why won't anyone work as hard as me? And my view on equity has always been, we'll give them a stake. Give them something, give them a reason to care as much as you do. And I do think that if you want people to act like owners, the best way to do that is to give them part of it, give them ownership. And with that comes a level of transparency, a level of openness about how the business is going in good and bad, and a level of responsibility to help make things happen and help make things work when things aren't doing so well. And I think, like, something that you do as an owner of a business is that you pull your sleeves up and you do whatever the business needs. And I think if you want to see that same behavior in your team, then I've always said, and I always believe, that equity is a really great way to do that. And I believe a lot in generosity, and I do feel that I've always there's a quote, and I can't remember who's it from. This is a slight tangent right at the end of the call, but I'll go with it anyway. But, like, it's the whole idea that if you have an idea, a generous idea to do something for someone else, like, often we can question it and be like, oh no, they won't care. Oh no, and it's like, just do it. Always do the most generous thing. And now I'm not saying that can sound quite like rogue in the context of equity and, like, giving away your business, but I do think there's something to be said. Okay, what's the most generous interpretation of what I could do here, without kind of giving away the entire business? Because I think the opposite of that is, like, what's the least I can do just doesn't feel quite right for me. Like, it's like, I value my employees based on the smallest amount that I can give them. And I don't know, it doesn't quite feel right.
I agree. I think the beauty of equity is that it's kind of like there are two courses in the same menu, because there's the general value and the amount of options you get, but there are also the terms that are probably, from a cultural imprint perspective, like, are at least as exciting to look into, like, how is a maternity leave handled or parental leave handled in your vesting schedule, or
Yes.
what happens when you leave, like, who's a good leaver, who's a bad leaver. So I think, do that, be generous, and then also don't take away your generosity, or don't betray your generosity on the term side of things, but kind of back it up there. I love that. Oh, thank you. And I love the conversation. So we've took a while to schedule it, but it was well worth it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I really feel, I don't know if it's it's definitely a very subjective opinion, but I feel like the 4 weeks that you spent resting, like it really shines through, like you're really like have an amazing energy with you today. So yeah, just thank you for bringing that.
No, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. And I really want to dig more into like those different terms and just geek out on that with you sometime. So let's book that in at some point.
Sounds good.
Awesome. It was good to have you.
Thanks, Natalie.
A lot. All right. See